We'll call this budget meeting public hearing to order March 24th at 7:01 p.m. We'll have the public hearing presentation by interim town manager, Mr. Hancock, followed by public participation. So if that, Lisa, if you want to take over and do the presentation. On the screen. Okay.
Well,
Should be fine.
yeah, it's putting the,
It looks like that.
is that what it's looking like?
Yes, it should be good.
Okay, all right. Sorry about that, folks. Just trying to get the presentation there correctly. Good evening, and tonight I'm going to go over the town manager's proposed budget for the 22-23 fiscal year. And I'll begin with the revenues for the town. Okay, so what I've included here are the historic and proposed budgeted revenues from previous years going forward. And as you can see, the state and federal grants that we've received over time have gone down. The investment income, although one year it had, a couple of years it had gone up, were very, very low again. COVID input, impact, and the economy have really done a number on investment earnings. Now I'm hoping that they will, with the Feds trying to raise some of the interest rates out there, so we'll see what happens. We also have licenses and permits. So these are all the revenues that I'm showing you tonight are all the revenues other than taxes that the town receives. So we have licenses and permits. We're seeing some trend upwards there. Charges for services, trends up there. We've had some development in town. Property sales and exchanges, improvements to property. So a lot of that has increased some of our charges for services. Now, education grants. You will notice in 2021, we received about $9.1 million on grants. That was the actual for that year. What had happened in the 21-22 budget that we were proposing last year, the governor held the revenue for education cost sharing grants stable in his budget. And the legislature was trying to determine what they wanted to do with it. And our professional organizations, our legislators were all pretty much telling us that we should not increase the revenue to what the governor's proposal was because they were not in support of it. As it turned out at the end, after we had already adopted our budget, the legislature decided to leave the revenues as the governor proposed it. So this number here for 21-22, these numbers here are what we budgeted. We will actually receive close to the 9.1 million that I'm showing you in 22-23. The excess funds that we will receive here will be managed pursuant to our Municipal Tax Stabilization Fund Ordinance, and the funds will be either set aside in the Tax Stabilization Fund, or we have to look at how other grants did under that program to see exactly how much will go there. In my proposed budget, again, the governor held it stable to this year for the education cost sharing. I decided to put the full amount in the budget to represent what the governor has proposed. I have not heard anything from legislatures or professional organizations, anything against it, so I feel comfortable with including those revenues in our estimates. So these are all the things that will offset your taxes. If you look at the expenditure percentages over the years, there's some years that we've been up there's some years that we've actually reduced the budget. It just depended on the grand list, what happened during that year, and the ability to be able to pass budget referendums. Now, you will see last year we were up. There's been a series of several years where it's been minimal increases. And there were times where at this point, we couldn't go without putting some substantial increases in place. What I'm proposing is a 2.99% in the Board of Education budget for their operational expenditure increase and 3.98% for the town side. And I'll get into explanations of all these later on, with an overall 3.25% increase in spending for next year. The good news is that I was able to do that with a reduction in the mill rate of about minus 2.4 mills on the grand because of the grand list. Our grand list went up 3.8% this year. That's the highest in the 10 years that I've been here that this grand list has increased. It gave us a little over $1.5 million, I think, extra funds based on the grand list that's able to be allotted throughout the budget process. This is what's made it easier for me to try to take everything into account to be able to cover some of the needs of the town, as well as try to give some tax breaks to those, well, all taxpayers who may or may not be able to afford the taxes on their properties. We're showing you just a little overview of some of the increases and decreases to our different revenues that aren't based on taxes, are non-tax revenues. It shows you I increased the state ECS funding a little bit for adult ed of almost 331,000. Some of our other non-education grants went up a net of about $16,000. Our licenses and permits, although it's shown here at 9,400, it's actually $17,000 higher than that, but it's because that $17,000 had been recorded as a revenue under that source where it rightfully should have been under the property tax value. It was for a telecommunications property tax that is paid directly from the state for some of the telephone companies that are serving the town. Charges for services are up about $57,000. Interest income is down, and I'm hoping it's going to hold with what we're planning to put forward, or hoping to get in the next fiscal year. And then the net impact for the reduction of what I'm using from fund balance is a reduction of about $192,000. So overall, another part of balancing the budget, over time, we have historically used about $200,000 from our undesignated fund balance. In the past few years, we've used a lot more than that, or allocated a lot more than that, and have been fortunate in some instances to not always had to use it, and sometimes we did, but it may not have been as much. So I feel comfortable with designating $200,000 from our unassigned fund balance to help offset the impact of the taxation. In addition, several years ago, we knew that Birch Grove debt would be coming on the books, the debt for the firehouses, and we had set aside funds from our debt service fund to help relieve some of the impact of the debt service payments on the general fund budget. So the debt service payments are going up this year. We're applying $68,000 towards that. And for the next few years, until the debt starts to go down, we will be using those funds as part of our use of, that is a committed fund balance to offset some of the increase in debt. So again, it does not affect the mill rate. Our rating agencies recommend us to have a 10 to 15% range of operating expenditures. The town is a AAA rated town, which is one of the best ratings you get. We also have one of the best ratings in the country for financial management. Standard & Poor's noted that a couple of years ago when they did our analysis, and we've rated very high, which not all communities, even if they're AAA rated, get that designation of a high valued financial management. At June 30th, our unassigned fund balance was about 15.6%. I'm estimating it's, depending on how things go this year, we may go down to 15.5%. Now, I just want it to be understood that fund balance is not a revenue source. It's usually for things that are a one-time use, if possible. So if you look at historically, yes, we have increased over the years, but this has helped us get our fund balance increased over time, which also has helped keep the AAA rating, or actually get upgraded to a AAA bond rating. Now, the reason why we want to have a AAA bond rating is because we are in the market very often issuing debt. Until we can get out of the situation where we have to issue debt to meet our capital needs, we want to keep that AAA rating, because if it goes down, it could cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars in extra interest, because now we're not as strong as we used to be, and the market will reflect that. Whereas investors may be taking more risk to buy our bonds, where currently they're not very risky right now with that AAA rating. So it's important to understand that's why we want to keep the rating and why we want to keep strong management over our finances and our reserves. Your unassigned fund balance gives you security in case there's an emergency. It gives you security of revenues falling short and needing to cover your debt payments, because you can never miss a debt payment. Now, the other thing I wanted to point out, even though rating agencies like you to be between 10 and 15% of expenditures, they would prefer you to be by the AAA, by the government finance officers' recommended practice of having a month and a half of operating expenditures, which is much higher than the balance that we currently have. So if we related to that, we're not nearly as high as we should be when you think of that level that they're recommending. The rating agencies have accepted our methodology with our policy that's in place, but would prefer us to be with the recommended practice of the GFOA. This just kind of shows you, and in our budget book, it's much more interactive with this chart, but it just kind of shows you the blue lines are our property taxes. And as you can see, that's what we're most dependent upon over the years. Previous years, we had a much higher state aid level of grants provided to the town, and as you can see, we're a little bit up from last year, and that's because of the ECS money that I talked about earlier. And then the last and least is the other sources of income that I discussed in the beginning. Now, talking about the expenditures. The 3.98% of the town operating is about $502,000 increase in the budget. The capital expenditures have gone up about $117,000. The debt service went up $50,000, which I had mentioned that I'm using the committed balance to help offset that. And the Board of Education had an increase of a little over 1.2 million for a total operating increase of almost $1.9 million. You can see over the years, here's how the town has been proceeding in the growing budget expenditures. The Board of Education as well. You can see that it's minimal increases over the years until this year really went up substantially. So here's a high-level view of where your tax dollars go, as well as the other revenues that we receive. Almost 70% of the overall budget is Board of Education. The town is almost 22%. You have a very minimal amount for capital improvements and debt service. That's the big pie. When you look at now a little more detail, you still have your Board of Education, but now it shows you here just what services you get for the town operations. You have your capital improvements, your library, your planning and development, human services, which is your senior services, human services, libraries up here, I'm sorry, and recreation. We have the emergency services, administrative services, public works, and finance and records. Now, this finance and records looks like a very large number, but be advised that that also includes the town debt, which is $4.7 million, as well as the contingency accounts for payroll and other contingencies. So breaking it down even further, now we just look at the piece of the pie that belongs to the town. About 17% of the town operating budget is for public safety. That would be your police, your fire, your ambulance, CERT, animal control, fire prevention, all of that. Your public works department, which includes the grounds maintenance, the streets and roads, your snow plowing, all the services for the physical buildings of the town that the town owns is within there. And that's about 35% of the overall budget. Community services are almost 8%. Planning and community development, 3.4%. General government is almost 26%. We have a very small amount for contingency, and like I said, that includes some of the payroll negotiation raises in there, as well as things such as the celebrations within the town, like the parade. Some of those small commissions are also in that area. Finance and records, again, that includes the debt management, the debt service for the town. So although it looks like a large number, that includes some of those things that drive that number up. Okay, so some of the drivers that affected the town side of the budget. We were fortunate this year. We do a lot of trending. We look at actuals. We look at pricing. We have a bid process regarding our electricity rates. We were able to lock in some lower rates regarding electricity fees. So that amount, we were fortunate to be able to get a $12,000, just a little over $12,000 decrease in that account. Our debt service, of course, has increased. This is primarily due to the Birch Grove project for the town portion that we are absorbing, as well as the firehouses that are being worked on in there as well. Capital improvements, the increase of 117,000 is mainly due that there's different equipment and needs that we have, but the biggest hit that we have to our capital budget right now is the mandated Vernon Sewer Improvement Project that the town has to pay our share of that project for the next 18, 19 years, whatever's left on it. So we're building in the increases, offsetting it and phasing it in each year until we don't have any other funds that we can help offset that increase. And then it'll totally be within the overall general fund supporting that budget for those expenditures. Some of the biggest hitting expenses of my budget has to do with the addition of 4 new positions, and some of those are being phased in, and some of those are coming in July 1st. Actually, only one is coming in July 1st. The town council back in December, January timeframe approved the fire department to apply for a grant. It's called a SAFER grant. And what that grant will do, if we are approved, will provide us with 3 new public safety officers going forward in year 1, and they will pay for the costs of those officers. We are still waiting to hear about whether we will win the grant or not, but we're very hopeful that it's going to happen. So this year I had it planned to be adding 1 public safety officer into the budget anyway. I have a recommendation, so we will be putting that officer in place July 1st. Once we go through, we'll start the hiring process probably a month or 2 before, but we will be putting that person July 1st, and hopefully if we get the award by then, we may be putting 3 people in place and we will not have to pay for it. My recommendation to the town council, and we've talked about it, but still have to come back to have them approve it overall, is to set these funds aside each year into our municipal stabilization fund so that it's built into the budget slowly, so that when year 3 comes along, I neglected to say, the grant is for 3 years, and after 3 years, the town must fully hire these public safety officers. So after 3 years, that would be a very major hit to our budget to increase it, a major increase to our budget. So rather than trying to put it all in 1 year and have your mill rate spike, we're slowly phasing it in each year. My recommendation is, even though we're budgeting those funds and do not have to pay them out, is to put it into a municipal stabilization fund. And if the council agrees with that, what will happen is each year we can use it to maybe help pay for some of the one-time type expenditures, because that revenue is not going to keep coming back. So you try to link it with things that will be one time, or capital needs, things like that. But certainly that's going to be up to the town council to decide how they'd like to move forward with it, but that's my recommendation. And maybe when the 3rd year comes along, we try to, or the 4th year, I'm sorry, when the 4th year comes along, maybe we use a little bit of that to further relieve some of the burden on the mill rate that will come into play. The next position is a public works laborer. I'm starting this position October 1st, if approved. And we've had so many complaints as far as not being able to address the needs of the community. We've had illnesses, people out on disability, things that happen, accidents. And several years ago, the one laborer position had been cut for 1 year, as well as all the snowplow drivers that we would pay separately as an outsourced service. Since then, the routes have increased in timing, and if you have a bad snowstorm, it could take several hours to be able to get around a second time. This is restoring that position that was eliminated. The plan was to put it back into the budget, but the funding just wasn't available each year when it was revisited. The next position is a senior center administrative assistant. And this one will be also July 1st start date. This is to bring a new person into the senior center to help assist with some of the programs, enhance the programs. The other situation that we have is that there really is only one employee assigned to that facility. There is another individual who works out of that facility, but is really responsible for doing home visits, other types of counseling type of work, or work that she's responsible for. If the senior director is out sick, out on vacation, there's no one there really to manage that building to be able to keep the seniors in place and to provide the services and programs. So we're hoping for enhanced programs as well as the additional coverage that's needed over there. And lastly is a part-time recreation coordinator. The department did request a full-time recreation coordinator based on everything that was coming in with the new positions this year. It was very challenging for me to be able to put a full-time position in. This position is hoped to begin April 1st of 2023. Some of my reasoning behind that was thoughts that with COVID, there's still been some slowness with programs, things like that. And maybe by that point in time, I sure hope that we're beyond the major issues of COVID and the ability to start really enhancing some of the programs that we offer through our recreation services. Again, this is another one-man operation. It's just Bruce Watt, who does a phenomenal job with what he has to manage. But he's working nights, he's working weekends, doesn't get paid overtime for that because he's salaried. And you know, he does a great job of trying to put it all together, but there's only so much one person can do to be able to do this. Now, my hopes is once we hire this position, we can generate enough revenue from new programs that could possibly even fund this position, maybe even bring it up to a full-time position and be fully self-supported. It may take some time to get there, building some funds through the general fund, then maybe repositioning it in the future. We just have to wait and see what happens. Another thing that is an impact on us is that the cost of trash removal, it's going up. The cost per ton, recycling years ago, we would be paid for recycling, maybe $40,000 a year, they would pay us to take our recycling. Now it's reversed and we have to pay the waste removal companies to take our recycling away. So there's fees for that. Over the years, we also have reduced the free bulky waste services. At one point, they were coming once a month. These pickups are very expensive. And what we've been doing over the years is working a deal with our waste removal company to do some of the services that they provide at no charge, but then we will pay a portion of it to still at least get one free bulky waste. That may be going away at some point also, but for the time being, in this next year that's coming up, we will be having the one free bulky waste for the residents, and we pay for that with other funds that we have set aside outside the general fund. So it's not an impact on the tax dollars, but I don't know if those funds will be able to support it going forward in future years. Little summary, the 4 positions I had told you about, plus we had phased in a new position in this year's budget that we're currently operating in for a grants project manager, grants administrator project manager. And the impact of just those alone is about 174,000. So out of that 502,000 increase, that piece of it right there alone is the 174 include, and also the employee benefits below it are all part of those numbers because of those increases. Also, we have union negotiations going on for 2 unions. Until we have those contracts settled, we have funds set aside within a separate account to account for those raises until we get the contract settled. So right there is about 300 and something thousand of your $500,000 increase. Cost of fuel is going up. It actually, after I put my budget together, came in higher than what I put it in the budget for. So I haven't changed it, and it's still here at a $50,000 increase, with probably another 6,000 to 10,000 beyond that, and we're going to have to figure out how we're going to deal with that. Professional services, this is mainly for our state troopers' costs, and that was a $15,000 increase there. Now, after we had put the state trooper budget into place, we were notified that because of new costs on the state level that they're increasing, that they charge us, we probably would need another $29,000 beyond this. I am aware of a trooper who recently, congratulations to him, is being promoted to a sergeant. He's on our staff now and will be leaving us. And I am hoping that the new trooper who comes in will be at a lower rate, because he was at the top of the scale. Hopefully a new trooper that comes in at a lower rate. So hopefully that'll make up the difference. If it doesn't, I'm going to have to look at where I freeze things, find other revenues, so on and so forth throughout the year. We also had a decrease in road materials, service contracts, different agricultural supplies. This is all through Public Works, and that was almost $32,000. So the impact of my proposed budget shows a decrease in the mill rate of 0.24 mills down to a 36.87 from a 37.11. The governor has also proposed a cap on motor vehicles. Now, we're getting mixed messages from the state capitol on this. I don't know where it's going. I know there's some controversy where they're concerned about the future reimbursement from the state to help the towns. His proposal includes bringing down the cap of the mill rate from 45 to 29 mils. We currently have a cap on motor vehicles of 45 mils, but Tolland has never hit that in our overall budget. So we've never billed the citizens at the higher mill rate. We've always kept it to whatever we were at. Since we were under 45 mils, we kept the motor vehicles at 45 mils rather than taxing motor vehicles higher. So if this proposal is approved, the mill rate would still decrease and go down to 37.04 mils versus the 36.87. The governor's budget proposes about a $1.2 million increase to revenue to offset what we would be losing based on the reduced mill rate. That is based on the prior year's grand list. This year, we were fortunate to have a lot of people buying cars, and also the value of their cars, the ones that were owned, going up. So because of that, the differential between what the governor says he's going to give us and what we really should have received based on our new year grand list is about $311,000 short. So that's why the mill rate doesn't stay as low, because I have to build in, if this scenario comes true, we would have to build in that loss of revenue unless the legislature finds some way to make sure that we get every penny that we should get. This is all, and if maybe we do not have any definite decision on this, so currently I'm proposing the budget based on how we always have. When looking at the new mill rate, I always do this presentation that shows you the low, medium, high residential properties and the low, medium, and high commercial properties and what the impact of the new mill rate would be. So the lower end property maybe would save $31 a year, the higher end would save $75 a year. The low end commercial, 46, high end commercial, about 188. All of this information is also in the online budget book that we have at Tolland.org. Under the finance department, you'll find all the budget information. If you look at the average tax increase over the years based on the different mill rates, for the last 6 years, the average has been about $193 for the average household. Back in February, I did an overview of our capital budget. I won't get into too much detail here, but just our capital budget includes all of our major assets, our roads, our facilities, our parks, the major equipment such as fire trucks, dump trucks, equipment to repair the roads, technology. All of that is within our capital budget. And our assets are aging, and for many years, the assets have been pushed off. And we're at a point in time now where we need to start addressing them. And we're doing what we can, and the council has been very supportive with the use of some ARPA funds recently to get some of these purchases out of the capital fund to save on the debt issuance costs for the town. So everybody wins on that. This here just shows, what a capital item is. I explained that. A life expectancy has to have a useful life of more than 8 years and a value more than $10,000. The dates of the process, we started in October working on the capital budget. In December, I shared it with the town council for my preliminary capital budget. We had the capital budget hearing in February, as I mentioned, and I've submitted it to the town council, and within this final budget, I have all the adjustments, and I'll speak to some of the things that have changed since that February meeting. The way we fund our capital is through general fund, and that's usually the lowest funding source applied in the building. Capital non-recurring, we have not been contributing to that fund but we do have some funds in there and we cautiously use them to offset some of the debt. We use non-referendum notes or bonds. That's part of our charter as to how much we can issue, which is only up to around $2.2 million a year. We have grants from the state for Town Aid Road. We have LoCIP funds, which is local capital improvement. We have school construction grants and other grants we're fortunate to get. Our ambulance services, the number of calls that our staff makes, we charge for those services. By state, we are mandated to charge for those services. So those funds that we collect are set aside in what is called an ambulance reserve fund. And they're used to purchase, mainly they're supposed to be used to purchase new ambulances to replace the ones in stock. Historically, over the past 10 years I've been here, not only have those funds been supporting the purchase of new ambulances, but they've been helping buy fire trucks, or at least refurbished fire trucks, AEDs. The most recent one was they're called the scuba air packs, which is public safety needs for the firefighters to be able to go into buildings, to have the oxygen, and to be able to breathe. You know, that fund was never intended to buy all those things, but unfortunately, there were safety issues. We had to find a way to pay for it, and it was used for that. Now, more recently, you will see the purchases of fire trucks, major apparatus, because they've been pushed aside for so long, within the capital budget, spread out over the next few years. Cemetery funds, we do sell cemetery plots. We use some of those funds not only to offset some of our capital needs, but also some of our workers who maintain those cemeteries. We have referendum bonding or borrowing. That is much like what we did with the Birch Grove project, the firehouse project. The voters voted to approve those projects to move forward, and the funds are issued through debt. Unallocated capital is pretty much non-existent these days, but if there's any projects that have any funds left over, some of that could sometimes be reallocated to other projects. Recreation Special Revenue Fund, that's the money that we earn from recreational programs. If there's any excess, not only does those funds manage all the recreation programs, the facilities that need to be taken care of for recreation, the grounds. It's also used to help do some improvements. Again, that fund is down with COVID over the past couple of years. We have not been able to put on the programs like we used to do. So it's pretty tight. And finally, the Utility Reserve Fund. That's a joint fund shared by the town and the Board of Education, where we pay all our utilities on. Several years ago, we put over $10 million in energy improvements in the Board of Education buildings, as well as some of the town buildings. Those improvements created savings in energy costs. But those improvements had to be paid for with those savings. So that, and the ability behind that it created for us was that we were able to replace boilers, furnaces that were on their last leg failing, that would have cost us hundreds of thousands of dollars to replace. And we were able to get it all done and create the savings to pay for them. So we did not have to pay for them ourselves that way. Plus it creates energy savings for the future. So that fund is used to pay the debt that is owed for those improvements that were done. It's used from the savings that were generated. And sometimes there's some extra funds within there, within the utility fund. There's a policy in place. Some of it can be used to balance if there's one year that's high, one year that's low, but the other part, if it gets to be over a certain percentage, can be used to do more energy efficient projects, which we have done. We recently replaced the lighting in some of the schools. That helped improve some of their costs there. Okay, I spoke earlier about the plant upgrade. I'm not going to go into too much more detail on this, but the annual amount that we have to pay the town of Vernon is about $165,000. As I said, this year I put about $80,000 in the general fund budget, and I'm taking $85,000 from our capital and non-recurring fund. So this is what's funded with your general fund portion of the budget for capital. We're doing the portion of the Vernon control plant, replacing the rear loading dock at Tolland High School, which is in total disrepair. The highway, one of our highway trucks, you can put your hand right through the frame and through the floor. That will be replaced. There's some pictures of this in our budget book, or at least on the presentation that I did back in February, which is also online. The part of the highway roof that was not part of the new highway has to have a new roof put on it. We have the various depreciation for our vehicles at the light duty vehicles at the Board of Education in the town. This year, the town amount increased because in the past, we were very fortunate that the fire association provided the vehicle for the fire chief and would pay for that in full. Unfortunately, some of their donations are down. They don't have the ability to do that any longer. So we're phasing in the cost to replace the fire chief's vehicle for the future, and then his vehicle will go down to the next person, the duty chief, as the older vehicles come out of the system. And it's not going to be replaced in the year that the chief had planned, but we had to be able to phase in the funding the best we could to make it happen. Now, there's other projects out there that are funded by other sources. At the Board of Education, I had originally had an articulating lift in the plan for about $80,000 to be funded by capital non-recurring. The Board of Education really wanted that out to year 2. So what I did was I moved it around to be able to still use the $80,000 in capital non-recurring. I took the 2 items, the conveyor dishwasher, which absolutely has to be replaced at Tolland Intermediate School, as well as the oven combo steamer for the high school. I reduced the values. They were a little over $44,000 each. I reduced the values down to $40,000 each, and that replaced the $80,000 that I moved out for the lift into year 2. So by doing that, that means the lift, if it goes through, will have to be funded with a debt issuance, because I will no longer have the funds to do the lift with the CNRE. There's a couple other items. They have a tractor, they have floor machines. These are items that are needed because of the new Birch Grove School and the needs over there for maintaining the facilities as well as their other facilities. There's a track resurface project going on, or will be going on. We hope to also repair the tennis courts. If you look at the tennis courts on Old Capitol Road, There's several cracking, there's a safety issue here, so the trip, fall, there's things falling apart. We're hoping to take 40,000 from our capital non-recurring fund and recreation funds to fund the rest. We have a pole shed at the highway garage, 88,000. We also have trying to address some of our ADA requirements in town. I'm hoping if I have sufficient funds in this year's budget to at least start looking at all the recreational fields in town, to have a study done to see what the needs are for ADA needs in those areas, for accessible needs for those who are disabled or have problems getting through some of those areas. Our first project, though, that is hopefully going to be funded is for an ADA walkway at the Cross Farms Park. What I did was, in order to do bonding, I increased the amount slightly because I needed a rounded number in order to do a debt issue. So it was a minor increase just to make it all balance. We have a truck for our snow removal. We have a cemetery fund also replacing a truck. So one truck from our capital fund and one truck from cemetery. I'm also taking some depreciation for 1 year from the cemetery fund to ease the burden on the general fund financing. We have a mower for the town and board of ed fields. The two big items that were moved out of the capital plan were for a VACOL, which would help us with our MS4 mandates for sewers and road, for the cleaning of our storm drains. That's a federal state mandate where they must be kept clean. There's certain percentages of salt and things like that, sand, that can't be put into they have to be cleaned out of those drains so that you have the right flow of water when there's storms. The ARPA subcommittee recommended to the town council to move that out of the budget to go ahead and purchase it this year with federal ARPA grant funds. In addition to that, they also are covering a $275,000 street sweeper. It's probably going to take a year or two for these items to even be received based on what's happening right now with COVID delays and everything else. They are on order, but the American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA funds will be paying for those two items. Those two items were originally planned to be funded with debt issuance. The impact of this really helps all taxpayers in the long run because now we won't be issuing that debt. We won't be having the interest expense related to it, and it'll reduce the amount of debt costs that we have in the future and the overall impact on the mill rate in the future. Public safety, we have to replace an ambulance, $370,000. That's from the ambulance fund. But as you'll see here, we're also recommending to refurbish one of our engine tankers, ET engine tanker, right, Chief? $180,000. It's a 2006 engine tanker. What we try to do, rather than trying to, going out and buying new all the time, is to refurbish whatever we can to get more years of service out of this equipment, rather than try to just buy new. Where we have to buy new, that's where we recommend buying it. Which in the next item is a 1987 engine tanker. We're looking to buy new on that one, and that's $750,000. Currently, the ARPA subcommittee we have not made a decision as of yet, but these three items we're looking at possibly trying to fund with ARPA federal government funds if we can. We may not be able to do all of them. We may be able to do a portion, but the goal here is if we do fund the ambulance, that may free up some funds in future years for some of the apparatus that we may have to buy. We just have to wait and see. That's still out for review, and we haven't made a decision yet, but our goal is to try to get some of these things, and of course, the town council has to agree to it, to get some of these things off the books and not have to issue debt where debt is in the future. And we're working on every possible way we could do that so that all the citizens of the town benefit from these funds rather than just a unique group. There are other things that we are looking at though, mental health things. I know I'm getting a little off task here, but those funds aren't just being considered for capital. There's other programs that are also being considered. Stay tuned. We have a tremendous amount of tree trimming that has to be done in this town. There was severe damage from insects and other diseases over the years. And each year we try to fund as much as we can to trim the trees, to also reduce the impact on power lines going down, damages to homes, damages to roads, roads being closed off, so on and so forth. So we do have a town aid road grant that we get from the state of Connecticut, and we plan on funding it with that $70,000. Our streets and roads. Back in 2018, the town did pass a referendum question and they've done it one other time before, to provide $5 million in bond funding to improve our roads. That barely hits the tip of the iceberg for the repairs that need to happen to our roads. But what our crews can do and the services that we can get from outside vendors, we can only do about $1 million a year worth of improvements. So what happens with that bond is we take whatever grant money we can get, we take a portion of the bond that was authorized and try to do $1 million within those all added together. That grant will be coming to an end in another year or two, not grant, that bond will be coming to another end in about a year or two. And at that point, we will probably look at maybe coming back to the public again with another referendum. I've built some of that into my debt management plan with the thoughts of, if it does pass, I've filtered that in to show the public where that would be. So if you look over the years, the contributions from the general fund to the capital improvements have been minimal. Most towns are significantly higher than what Tolland has provided. Part of this is just the ability to be able to fund a lot of these capital needs. Many, as I said earlier, many of our project equipment, buildings have really been pushed further and further down the pipe. Like I said, we're getting to a point now where we can't push anymore. And if we don't replace and you know, we maintain, we do as much as we can, with welding trucks back together, everything that we can. But when it gets to a point where there's safety issues and things like that, we can't have these vehicles on the road. And not only did we make that decision, but we have state mandates also with the vehicle inspections for the fire department, the public works, that if they don't agree with it, they're pulling it off the road. And we need the fire trucks, et cetera, to be able to provide the services, the public safety services, road maintenance, snow plowing. So this year, I'm proposing $255,000, which is about $117,000 higher. When you look at my debt management plan, Our plan is to phase in the increases over the years. Now, this year's budget, I'm going up $50,000 to a $4.7 million budget. Our actual debt service next year is almost $5 million. What I have is a debt service fund where we receive premiums on bond sales, things like that. Some of those expenses associated in this number here by IRS rules have to be paid by those proceeds for premiums on bonds and things like that. So what we are doing is we have our total expense, but we're not funding it all with the general fund. We're funding the rest of the balance with those proceeds. If you look here in the year after next, there will be about 5.4 million. The plan is to go up to 4,750,000, again, with an offset of the committed fund balance so that there's no impact on the mill rate for that increase. And we will be using almost 700,000 from this other fund. The anticipation is that we're selling bonds in this fiscal year. We should have a significant premium. If we don't, then we look at what else we have to do. But some of that is included in here as well. Then we hope to just stabilize it. Our previous plan had increases along the way and not just stabilizing it. So at this point, we've pulled some items out of our debt plan and we're able to not have to increase it going down the pike after the year after next. So I just want to tell you about some of our upcoming dates. March 29th, the town council will be putting their final reviews of the budget. They will be discussing and doing a presentation to the public. That will be done in town council chambers, and it begins at 6 o'clock in the evening. So they will be discussing their budget, finalizing it. I'm sorry, they will not be presenting it that night, but that's when they plan on adopting what they want to send to town-wide referendum. The annual budget presentation, what I referred to a minute ago, will be done by the town council on April 18th. And that will be done in this room, the library program room, as well as a hybrid setup like we have this evening. And then don't forget to please go out and vote on May 3rd for the budget, one way or the other. And that is our annual budget referendum, which I think is only held.
I think it's
That's
here.
here, right? Yeah, I thought it was here.
Yeah.
Which is only held in one voting location, which is the library program room here at Town Hall. Any of this is subject to change if some of these meetings, that is, if COVID goes crazy again, but let's hope we're there. So with that, I am finished.
Thank you, Lisa. So at that point, we are at public participation. We'll first have Councilman Murray, who normally reports on public or correspondence to council. Will, for our rules, report correspondence and summarize the testimony of items that was received. What we did receive, I believe, one request about reading into the minutes. We cannot do that, it's not part of our rules, but it is allowed to be included into the packet, comparable to members of the public that do speak and have their testimony included. So with that, I'll turn it over to Councilman Murray to summarize. I believe we have 3 emails, and then we'll open it up to members of the public, either in person or on Zoom, to participate. And if you're on Zoom, you can hit the raise hand function or *9 if you're on a mobile device.
We had 3 correspondents come in today regarding the budget. One was in support of the Senior Center Administrative Assistant, and the other 2 were in support of the town manager's recommended budget and the Board of Ed recommended budget.
Thank you, Councilman.
I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry.
I forwarded all three of them to Lisa for inclusion in minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Murray. So at that point, is there anyone in the public that would like to approach the front row of the seats so they can be viewed by the Zoom, the Owl camera? If not, if there's anyone that's online that would like to participate, again, you can hit the raise hand function. There is no time limit for participation, but we obviously encourage folks to be mindful of anyone else that's interested in participating.
You could see it.
We'll make sure people allowed to raise their, okay, there we go.
I think so, yeah.
All right, so Kate Howard Bender,
See if we can hear it.
are you? With the
Good
Zoom?
evening, everybody. Yep, good evening, everybody. Kate Howard Bender, 103 Goose Lane. First, I wanted to acknowledge the Board of Ed members that are on this call. Thank you for being here to support your town and your students and all of the town council. Thank you for putting this to a public hearing as usual. I know it's a process, but it's appreciated. The thing that I would like to say is that I would like to make sure that the entire budget is put through to the voters. That, you know, it's about time that we had an entire budget so that we don't have to continue to just maintain. Our town deserves to move forward. We've had too many years of too many cuts, as we well know. So I would just ask you to, you know, do what your town employees have asked you for. And Lisa, I'd appreciate it if you put that $55,000 back. But I'm sure that Walt will figure it out, as he always does. Again, thanks everybody for the work. Please put the entire amount through. Our kids, our community, our seniors, our fire department, our first responders, they all deserve it, and we're definitely worth it. Be well.
All right, thank you, Kate. We are, other counselors, we're trying to get the screen fixed on here, but it is being recorded and is available for viewing afterwards. But I am also on the Zoom chat, so I can see people that are being recognized. So I believe next we have Jennifer Gallichan.
Hi, Jen Galishant, 150 Timber Trail. I'm also a Tolland Board of Education member. The superintendent and Board of Education worked very hard this year to approve a reasonable budget increase of 3.13%, which has now been reduced to 2.99%. At this point, we have avoided direct impacts to staff and students, but an additional reduction will require us to cut items, programs, and services from general education, as special ed costs are fixed. These cuts will come at a time when our students have already lost too much. Although many great programs have been added over the years, such as Pathways and LEAP, we have also lost programs such as World Languages in the middle school and Technology at Birch. The pandemic also highlighted many shortcomings, such as one-to-one tech, which was put off for years, leaving students, staff, and parents ill-equipped at a precarious time. Our current proposed budget allows us to maintain a counseling position at TMS during a vulnerable time for students, a TMS THS math teacher and numeracy coach, and adds a social studies teacher, allowing us to add a state mandated course without removing sections of other popular courses. As a parent of 2 school-age children and an avid volunteer, I assure you, we are not overstaffed and our classrooms are not undersized. It is quite the opposite. Over my 9 years volunteering in the schools, I've seen class sizes in younger grades reach a level of 26 students per class. A significant amount of this year's increase is for staff compensation, which was negotiated by a bipartisan committee. It is well-deserved, it is fair, and it is necessary. Over the last few years, our staff has been stretched to their limits as they have worked to support our students, sometimes at the detriment of their health and personal lives. With the amount of pressure to resume full in-person school days, it's clear that the whole of what is provided within our buildings enriches the lives of our children greatly. I recognize you will be discussing many concerns to budget increases tonight and the impacts it will have as a whole on our community. But if there was ever a time to prioritize education, this is it. Education and career opportunities become increasingly competitive every year, and Tolland students deserve the best education possible. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jennifer. Is there anyone else in the public that would like to participate? And also as a quick, Heather McCann is in the public, if you'd like to approach maybe the second or first row.
Sure.
And if there are any questions, by the way, for anyone that is in the public, we do have several department heads and directors on that can answer through myself or Lisa.
Yeah. Heather McCann, 62 Crossan Drive. Today is my wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
Thank you. And instead of being home with my family, watching our wedding video, or out on a date night with my husband Ryan, I'm here because it's worth it. We're not wealthy, we both work, we volunteer, we don't drive expensive cars, we don't take fancy vacations. My husband and I are still paying on our own college loans, and we have an identified class 2 crumbling foundation, which we are on the pending list for. We decided not to apply for a reduction in taxes as entitled because we didn't want the community to take a hit. We believe in talent. I've been listening to the budget meetings for several years now, and the overarching theme of not wanting taxes to go up at all costs is really doing a disservice to the community at large. It misses the larger goal of building on the strengths of the community with a focus on tomorrow, not just today. We don't fund our schools adequately or provide for our services appropriately. What value do we have? Why would people live, work, or play here? What is the incentive? I've heard several departments say that they are operating at the bare minimum. Some only operational, people work for free. Many of our public service providers and school administrators are pulling double duty and working overtime because we do not give them what they need. We underpay our first responders, town employees, and teachers. It's been brought up several times. Why would people choose to work here? Do you think minimally funding services are not at all as helpful to our community? For those who are on a fixed income, we have numerous programs in place that are underutilized and rarely discussed publicly because we don't have adequate resources available to even engage with those folks who would benefit from these programs the most. Ordinance 60, which was brought up the other night, while imperfect in its current form and platform, would be very helpful with the tune-up. But instead of making it a priority, it was suggested by some to kick that can down the road, drag it out. Why would we delay this? Budget management is a healthy skill for any town to have, but like anything, it must be balanced with a plan for a prosperous future. In the last several years, we have overused the skill of budget management and lost our focus on growing the value of this town. I heard the BOE budget reduced because I just want to keep the costs down. It sounds self-serving. Our elected BOE members worked hard on bringing a budget forward to the town council. Our district's administration doesn't ask for the moon. They ask for what's fair, what is required by law under IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and what is needed to help keep our children growing, learning, competitive, our facilities functional, and our teachers provided for. Just maintaining status quo is not helpful for any of these students. The oversized classrooms make it difficult for those that need the extra assistance and attention. And schools are a town's biggest asset when funded appropriately. The rhetoric of special education and other supportive programs and services cost too much money is disinformation. To constantly need the reminder that it saves money to keep our children in district rather than send them elsewhere either means you are not listening or you don't care. Further, we are talking about children here, and there are many who, one, are part of this community and belong with their peers as much as possible, and two, are entitled to a free and appropriate education under IDEA. It's been mentioned by multiple counselors that Dr. Willett will always find ways to adjust when the budget is cut. What is the alternative? He has to. And he will do it with a smile because that is his nature to do so. It doesn't mean he likes it or that now some will do without or that he overinflated his original budget proposal. I ask you, is just maintaining the status quo okay with you when so many children are struggling? Is now really the time, to politic and keep the numbers down when we have the ability to fund our departments as there is a surplus. When you go back and listen to Ms. Murray's questions of all the departments and services, do you feel you can meet your program goals of this budget? You will hear a lot of hesitancy and caveats. Is that who Tolland wants to be? Just okay, just maintain. Our family, our children, our first responders, our educators, and Tolland is worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Are there any other members of the public that would like to participate? And if you are on Zoom, you can hit the raise hand function. Or if you are, Kenny Trice, see your hand is raised.
Good evening, Kenny Trice, 53 Doe Run. First of all, I'd like to congratulate everyone who worked on this budget because it is a thankful process. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of hours. A lot of people spent countless weekends and weeknights trying to work on this. So let me say thank you to everybody. I'm in support of the budget, but I'm looking for a compromise. Town manager's budget, I can support it, but I've also heard from the folks on the Board of Education, and those are parents that have students here. Let's seek a compromise. I understand there's a difference between it. There could be some compromise, and here's why. For years, we've operated on a premise that everything should be zero-based. The problem with that is you pay me now or you pay me later. As an interim town manager mentioned, we have vehicles that are falling apart. We have maintenance that hasn't been done. And by the same token, we have some issues on our educational system. So though I can support the town manager's budget, I would seriously consider giving some thought to what we can do on the educational side, where there's got to be a compromise. The numbers are not that far apart. Compromise is something that we have to learn to do. In terms of those residents that are struggling, and there are many of them, we can help them. There are programs, we need to take those into account, but we cannot allow that to stop us in our tracks and cause us to be reactionary as we have been over the last few cycles. We need to develop plans going forward of how to deal with things that will break down, how to replace things before there's holes in the trucks. We need to keep that in mind, how we address our debt service. So I support it, but I'd like to see some type of compromise if we can. And again, my thanks to everybody that worked on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Danny Trice. Is there anyone else in the public? It's going on for a third time. If you are on Zoom, you can get the raise hand function, or if you're in the public. All right, going once, going twice. We'll move to item 4, which is adjournment. I would entertain a motion to adjourn at 8:18 p.m. So there's a motion.
So moved.
So by Councilor Murray, is there a second? I'll second it. Seconded by Vice Chair Regan. Since we're all here, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? No abstentions. All right, so we are adjourned. Thank you everyone for coming out. And please keep in touch through the rest of the budget cycle.